I am happy to introduce our two speakers, Stacey Kenfield and Greta Macaire. Stacey Kenfield is professor of urology at University of California, San Francisco, Helen Diller Family Comprehensive Cancer Center, nice long name, and she's the Helen Diller Family Chair in Population Science of Urological Cancer. And we have Greta Macaire. She's an oncology dietitian and nutritionist at University of California, San Francisco, Helen Diller Family Comprehensive Cancer Center as well. So thank you both for joining us today. And it is my pleasure to hand it over both to you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us be part of this Education and Support Summit. I'm Stacey Kenfield. I'm an epidemiologist and behavioral scientist at UCSF, where I've been focusing on the topic of diet and lifestyle and cancer outcomes for over 15 years. I'm going to begin with the epidemiologic evidence on the association of exercise and diet with prostate cancer, followed by Greta Macaire, who is an oncology dietitian nutritionist that works very closely with me on my behavioral studies in men with prostate cancer. She'll go over how to put the evidence that I'm going to share into practice. And then we're going to close with some resources for you, as well as tell you about a couple of studies you might be interested in. So let's get going. So I'm going to start first with some data on exercise and prostate cancer. I was lead author on the first paper to examine this association of physical activity after prostate cancer diagnosis with prostate cancer death and overall mortality. This is some data from that study published in JCO in 2011, looking at MET hours per week, which is a combination of intensity and duration of exercise. On the x-axis and on the y-axis, you can see the hazard ratio. No evidence of association is that bar, that dotted line at 1. And you can see that with more exercise or more physical activity, there is a lower risk of both prostate cancer specific mortality in blue and overall mortality in green. What we saw was a benefit that started at about 30 minutes of walking 6 days a week for overall mortality. But that benefit was not realized until more exercise was completed every week, where you see it took about an hour a week, an hour daily of jogging, or about 2 hours a week, 2 hours daily of walking to see that benefit of about 60% lower risk of prostate cancer specific mortality. This has been studied in multiple cohorts since then. One of the studies I wanted to highlight was the study by Bon et al. In 2015 that showed that you could do as little as 20 minutes a day of exercise. This was looked at in terms of walking or bicycling versus less was associated with the 39% lower risk of prostate cancer specific death. So every little bit counts. And so I hope this encourages you, if you're not currently active, that even doing a little bit, 20 minutes a day, is enough to see a benefit. We have also, this data has been looked at multiple ways. These are meta-analyses that were done combining data from multiple studies that reported about comparing about 4 to 5 cohort studies. They saw a 31% lower risk of prostate cancer specific death in men with prostate cancer who were doing the highest versus lowest activity, and also a 40% lower risk of all-cause death. This led to updates in the physical activity guidelines for Americans in 2018, where there is now a area that shows that prostate cancer survivors have a lower risk of dying of prostate cancer if exercising after diagnosis. On this slide, I also include the current recommendations for all Americans, which is 150 minutes or more of moderate intensity exercise per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous exercise per week or combination, 2 days or more per week of muscle strengthening activities, and then some balance training during the week. I wanted to just highlight this study by Lavery et al. In JCO that was published in 2023 that actually looked at this cutoff, this 150 minutes per week of exercise in a group of people with cancer. This was part of the prostate, lung, colorectal, and ovarian screening trial of 11,000 cancer survivors. What they reported was that those people who were meeting that cutoff of about 150 minutes per week had a 25% lower risk of overall death. And so there is good evidence now that these guidelines are very meaningful, and we would encourage you to aim for these guidelines. But if you're not doing any exercise currently, I would start slow. This is a paper that was published in 2023 by one of our colleagues, Carrie Winterstone at Oregon Health Science University. And she has shown this table in her paper that indicates that you can do exercise at any level, even if you're inactive right now. There's some exercise that you can do safely. And the take home is really that any type, frequency, or duration at tolerable levels of intensity can have some benefit for you on your overall health and well-being. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about diet and prostate cancer. I wanted to highlight some data on plants. Some of the words are not showing up on the slide, but I will tell you what they say. So we looked at the plant-based diet index in multiple studies. This diet index was developed at Harvard School of Public Health. We looked at it in relation to prostate cancer progression in the CAPTURE cohort. The CAPTURE cohort was started at UCSF. It includes 15,000 men with prostate cancer from over 43 urology practices from 1999 to 2018. This study was among men who reported their diet in a food frequency questionnaire. So they were part of the diet and lifestyle sub-study. This sub-study included over 2,000 men with prostate cancer. And what we found was that those who adhered to a higher plant-based diet index or ate more plants had a 47% lower risk of prostate cancer progression. We also looked at this by Gleason grade at diagnosis and saw that with the healthful PDI, which basically assigns less points to those unhealthful plant foods like fruit juices, sugar-sweetened beverages, refined grains, potatoes. Those people that had a healthful PDI, a higher level of those healthful plant-based foods had a 55% lower risk of progression. Studies have been done also looking at this plant-based diet index and quality of life in men with prostate cancer. So Dr. Stacey Loeb led a study that was done in the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study with many of us at UCSF, and she reported that those who ate more plants had better scores for sexual function, urinary function, incontinence, and better hormonal and vitality. So this is very exciting. We're actually trying to replicate these findings right now in the CAPTURE cohort, and hopefully we'll be able to share those results in the coming year. I wanted to share this slide as well on some data that we published recently with Dr. Wang, who's now a postdoc at Harvard School of Public Health. This came out very recently. These are data from the multi-ethnic cohort study. This is a cohort study of 215,000 people that were enrolled between 1993 and 1996, mostly from California and Hawaii. This is the most diverse cohort that we have in the United States. We were interested in diet after diagnosis of prostate cancer, and that group of people was about 2,600 in this bigger cohort. And she and us together looked at 16 different lifestyle scores in men with non-metastatic prostate cancer. And here are the findings. We found benefits for 3 scores for all-cause mortality and cardiovascular-related mortality after these scores were looked at after diagnosis of prostate cancer. There was no association with any of these scores for prostate cancer-specific death in the overall population, but we did see that one of these scores, the 2021 prostate behavior score, which we have reported on previously, saw a benefit among African American men. So this was very exciting. This is the first study to show a benefit in a subgroup of people. And so we're really hoping that more data come out of the study that is related to prostate cancer and clinical outcomes. I wanted to share this slide to just show what we know currently about what someone should do after a prostate cancer diagnosis and how it's related to progression or mortality. So the things that are in green are things that are beneficial. For example, cooked tomatoes, especially cooked tomatoes that have been cooked in olive oil. Cooked tomatoes have more bioavailable lycopene than raw tomatoes, so that's why we recommend them being cooked. So the things in red are things to avoid. We published on selenium showing selenium supplementation is harmful for prostate cancer specific mortality. The things in yellow are things to limit. And then the things in the middle, like body mass index and moderate alcohol, you want to sort of stay within a healthy range. So a BMI less than 25. And then if you do drink, drink in moderation, and wine is preferred for prostate cancer specific outcomes. I wanted to just share these data on eggs and prostate cancer with you. We get a lot of questions about this. The title doesn't show up, but this slide is about eggs and prostate cancer. What we show is that for men prior to diagnosis, there is an increased risk. So if we're looking at pre-diagnosis egg intake, in a healthy population, this does increase risk of lethal prostate cancer at levels of about 2.5 eggs per week. In the health professionals follow-up study, we've also looked at this after diagnosis in 2 different cohorts. Again, in the health professionals follow-up study, there was no association for egg intake after diagnosis with lethal prostate cancer. But in the capture cohort, we did see a 2-fold increased risk of progression at levels of about 5.5 eggs per week. So we would recommend, there was no association with lower levels. We would recommend eating less than 5 eggs per week so that you don't have that increased risk. And finally, I wanted to share this slide. You may know that more men will die with their prostate cancer than from their prostate cancer. And among other causes of death, the leading cause is heart disease. And so we like to present the data in context of what to do for your overall health given your risk. And so here are the findings and the recommendations for heart disease prevention, cancer prevention, and lethal prostate cancer prevention. And you can see there's a lot of alignment across the different columns. You can see the green means good, the X means limit. And so, for example, fruits and vegetables, very good for prevention of heart disease and cancer, and also lethal prostate cancer. And for this, we would encourage you to eat raw vegetables, cooked tomatoes, and cruciferous, which have been associated with prostate cancer outcomes and show a lower risk of those prostate cancer specific outcomes. I'm happy to go over other questions that you might have in the Q&A, and I'm going to turn it over now to Greta to talk about advice for you on how to incorporate some of these into your own life.
Okay, thank you, Stacey. Hi, I'm Greta. I am a dietitian at the UCSF Cancer Center, and I am trying to advance the slides. I think don't quite have control from what here we go. Okay, so I talk to a lot of men with prostate cancer in individual consultations and group classes. And so just really want to focus on some key things to think about. With all the diets out there, a lot of the questions are just the basic, what diet should I follow? You know, there's many different diets and it can bring a lot of confusion around that question. And so rather than focusing on a specific diet to follow, I like to look at what are some strategies that we can all think about when we're trying to create a nutrient-dense diet. The first one would be eating mindfully. So in other words, just approaching your eating with intention. This is going to be with a focus on what your body needs and making choices that support your health goals and your well-being. As Stacey mentioned, building a balanced eating plan around a variety of colorful, flavorful, plant-based foods. The plant-based foods have all of the different nutrients that our body needs, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and compounds called phytonutrients, which promote our health in various ways. We want to look at prioritizing whole foods and limiting processed foods to get the most nutrition out of our diet. And then whenever possible, getting nutrients from food versus supplements. So with a plant-based diet, you see from this diagram that the majority of foods that are eaten come from plant sources. Vegetables, fruits, could be whole grains, plant proteins like beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Now, a plant-based diet doesn't have to completely exclude animal protein. It's just that animal foods like fish, chicken, low-fat dairy, such as Greek yogurt, are eaten in much smaller amounts. So you can see from the diagram, makes up no more than about 25% of the overall diet, and that's still within a plant-based diet. So kind of thinking about really incorporating as many plant foods on the plate as you can throughout your day. This table, these are two tables. Stacey mentioned the benefits of eating cruciferous vegetables and those cooked tomatoes, which are our lycopene-rich, one of our lycopene-rich foods. And this table comes from a booklet that we have that's our diet recommendations guide. You can access it from the QR code at the top of the slide, and we'll give you that resource again at the end. But we list out what are all the foods that fit into these categories that you could include in your diet. So typically, if you're not somebody that really enjoys kale, there's many other options for cruciferous vegetables that you can include. We give information on amounts to try to include and how to eat those, such as cooked tomatoes with cooked in a little bit of oil, for example, to help with the absorption. I want to talk also next about this concept of eating more whole foods and limiting processed foods and put that into perspective. So eating more ultra-processed foods are things where we've taken an actual food such as an apple and we process it into a completely different product. And with that processing, most of the nutrition, things like the fiber and the vitamins and phytonutrients, are removed during that heavy processing. And then typically some things are added, such as maybe high fructose corn syrup, added coloring, that additionally detract from the health benefits of eating that food. So when you hear, limit processed foods, we're really talking about these ultra processed foods that have very little nutritional value. It doesn't mean that you can't use prepared foods or some limited processed foods for time saving and convenience items. I definitely encourage people to look at ingredients. So things like frozen fruits and vegetables can be very handy. Canned beans can be very handy. Maybe washed, bagged greens. Those types of things are prepared, but we would definitely not call them ultra processed foods, and they can save a lot of time and be convenient. If you're buying products in the store that are packaged, just getting to know the ingredient list can be really a good place to start. And when you look at the ingredients, for example, in the second line, a processed food would be store-bought hummus. Well, looking for those with ingredients that you could picture in your kitchen, so in your pantry and in your cupboard, if that's what the ingredient list is, that's a fine food to include as sort of a time saver. But the ultra processed foods really reduce the nutrient value of those foods that we're eating. So we want to minimize those. Now, looking at eating a more plant-based diet, the question comes up a lot around protein and how to get enough protein when we're eating a lot more plant foods and how much protein we really need and from what foods. So I think this is actually a really important thing to be considering because protein is essential. It provides structure and function, many different functions in the body. And overall, our needs vary from person to person. But as a minimum for older adults, if we're thinking about maintaining muscle mass, a good place to start is to target getting about 0.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight over the course of the day. So an example would be for a 180-pound person getting at least 90 grams of protein per day. And rather than kind of loading that into a big dinner that's very protein heavy and skimping on protein throughout the day, the best results in terms of muscle mass and function of the body is to spread that protein intake out throughout your day. So you're getting, 20 to 30 grams per meal, having a little bit at a snack if you're doing any snacking. And so how do we get 20 or 30 grams of protein from foods that we would eat, and especially focusing on those best choices for heart health and prostate cancer survivorship? Well, if we're looking at plant proteins, we could look at something like beans or lentils in the cooked form, providing about 20 to 30 grams in 1.5 cup serving. Or if you're looking at something like skinless poultry or fish, about the portion of a deck of cards, which is 3 to 4 ounces, would provide 20 to 30 grams of protein. And that's really an optimal amount to try to target at a meal. And you still get protein from other foods like vegetables, whole grains, things like nutritional yeast. And those contribute some protein throughout the day, just in smaller amounts, but do contribute towards the total protein intake for the day. A lot of times the question again comes up around diets when we're thinking about weight management and how do we maintain a healthy weight, which can come up a lot for men with prostate cancer. And again, rather than going for a diet, a specific diet, let's look at strategies that can help achieve a healthy weight in the long term and in a more sustainable way. So getting to know your body's hunger and satiety cues can be very helpful so that you're eating when you're hungry and then trying to eat until you're about 80% full. So you feel satisfied, you don't feel hungry anymore, but you're really not eating to that point of kind of getting a little too full. This is a natural way to control portions without weighing, measuring, and counting calories. Shifting your eating pattern towards eating more during the day, which is when we're more active, is a great strategy for weight management, and generally eating lighter at night. So eating less at night and distributing our food more during the day, and thinking about doing less snacking in the evening. Third tip would be to put some planning into eating. Planning is just really the way to set yourself up for success. And this can mean a lot of different things, for different people. If you're somebody that has a busy work week, that might mean that you're grocery shopping once a week, you're doing some meal prep, meal planning, maybe batch cooking. So you cook and clean once, but you can eat several meals. If you're a traveler, that might mean looking at your destination and looking for healthier restaurant options near where you're staying, or seeing where the grocery store is so that you can get some healthy options to have in your room. And then overall, there's some studies showing that eating a more nutrient-dense, whole foods, high-quality diet is more sustainable plan for long-term weight control when they compare them to certain diets such as low-fat or low-carb diets. Now, in my last few minutes, I want to touch on supplements because we get a lot of questions about dietary supplements. And my first recommendation is that we want to focus on getting foods first and not really trying not to supplement if we can avoid that, because foods provide a much wider range of nutrients. There tends to be better absorption and bioavailability from foods. There's synergy with foods and greater safety and regulations. If you are looking at supplements, I would recommend discussing it with your healthcare team before starting the supplement so you can learn about interactions with medications or health conditions. And then because the supplement industry is not that well regulated, looking for products that are third-party tested for purity and potency. And some of the labels that you can look for would be from NSF, USP, or CL, which is Consumer Lab. Those are testing agencies that can verify that your supplement is pure and potent. Sometimes we look at supplementations for bone health, and again, in our guide, we provide a good list of all the nutrients required to support bone health. Could be particularly beneficial for men undergoing hormone therapy for prostate cancer to be thinking about this. And a lot of these things we can get from food, with the exception of vitamin D. Most of the time, a vitamin D supplement is recommended. For people on vegan diets, not necessarily needing supplements if it's carefully planned, but some things to be thinking about, such as vitamin B12, may need to be supplemented. And last but not least, I just wanted to talk about protein powder because I get a lot of questions on protein powder. Basically, they're powders designed to boost protein intake. They're added to smoothies or taken as protein shakes, and they can be helpful for people with higher protein needs. But they're certainly not a substitute for getting food sources of protein that provide other nutrients as well. If you are looking at including a protein powder, just some quick tips for choosing a good one is to first pick a source that you digest well. Look for one that provides 20 to 30 grams of protein per serving and has all the 9 essential amino acids, meaning it has all the building blocks to make it a complete protein. This is particularly beneficial if you're buying a plant protein, getting a mix of plant protein sources to make it a complete protein. And then always, again, selecting one with the least ingredients, minimal added sugar, and that's been third-party tested. So those are some tips from my regular practice, and I'll turn it back over to you, Stacey, to talk about our resources.
Great. So Greta mentioned our resources. The first QR code takes you to the resource page, which has the diet guide that is shown in on the right side. But there's also other guides there, a food guide for prostate health, how to manage fatigue with diet and exercise, strategies for healthy sleep. The second QR code is a study called Eat, Move, Sleep. It's a new observational online study based at UCSF, but it's open to anyone. It's a survey-based study with a yearly questionnaire and medical follow-up, so we can continue to study many of the topics we discussed today. And finally, Tools to be Fit is a clinical trial. It's testing different tools to help people make changes to their nutrition and physical activity. It's enrolling people with the diagnosis of 1 of 8 cancer types, including prostate cancer. If you'd like to learn more, please go to those QR codes. Thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed being here, and we're happy to take a couple questions.
Perfect. So we are very short on our time. I know you guys had so much good information to share. What I can do, if it's all right with everybody, I can always share these lists of questions that you guys asked during the session. This PDF, or not PDF, this presentation, we can also share it with you all. So we hope we can do that, and maybe we can get some of those questions answered at a later date for you all. I just don't want anyone to be late for our next session. So I just want to give a huge thank you to Stacey and Greta for all of this wonderful information. Diet and exercise are always super big topics, especially for the prostate cancer community. I do just want to put a quick poll up just to get any sort of feedback for you guys. Well, maybe I won't because I don't see the poll. So we will skip the poll for this session. I think just based on how engaged everyone was with all the questions that were asked shows to me that this was a really great session. And again, we hope to get some of your questions answered at a later date by Greta and Stacey. So thank you everybody for coming today. And we do have our next session starting right now. So go ahead, head out of this one and head back to the auditorium for our next session.